Hey there, folks. It's Jay Frost speaking to you from the Philanthropy Mastermind series. So happy to have you here. And I do see there are already people in the room with us and probably more to join us in the next few seconds. So forgive me as I kind of blabber on here for a moment as we get started today. But I do want to welcome everybody to the room, and that includes Nettie and Lauren and Jasmine, who have already started warming up the chat. We really do appreciate that. And I know that our guest today would love to know where you're from, just as the three of you have shared, maybe which organization you're with, what you do. All of that's going to be very helpful for context for her and for one another, because the chat's a place for all of you to get to know one another, which is one of the great parts about this series. We may not be able to see you or hear you because of this format, but it's also a welcome place for you to talk with one another in the chat. If you don't know already about this series, you can learn a lot more about it and all the episodes that have come before today's over at the DonorSearch site. That's the site of our sponsor. And since 2016, they provided a platform for us to have these conversations with guests like our guest today. And that is something you'll see plenty of on the DonorSearch site under the resources tab. That's at donorsearch.net. And while you're there, of course, you can learn more about the company itself and all their work in making sure we understand our donors better, since they are at the core of everything that we do and make possible, and really at the core of the conversation we're going to have today about giving. But I'll get back to that in a moment. So once again, thank you for being here. Our thanks to our sponsor. And one final note here, which is that today actually marks, it's a special day. This is our 600th episode, which I did not realize until I did our metrics yesterday. It's kind of fun. So you're here to celebrate a piece of that action. That goes back again to 2016. That consists of webinars, webcasts like today's conversation, and our podcast, which is a deep dive into the personal lives and professional backgrounds of leaders in the space. All of that, again, is available to you on the DonorSearch site. But we really appreciate you being here to be a part of that conversation and to be a part of today's conversation. So to get the wheels started, so to speak, I'd love to ask you a question, which you're free to answer in the chat or just to ruminate about, but it'd be great to hear what you have to say about it, which is whether or not you think that giving is selfish. And the reason I ask, of course, is because that's what today's conversation is going to be about with the author of Giving is Selfish, a person who has been in the field for quite a while, working as a major gifts officer in her current role, but also going back for a number of years, working with a number of institutions on the fundraising side, but then as a person who is trained in and very concerned with wellness, has brought these two ideas together to try and make sure we can understand what it is to give, but also the positive benefits that it brings. So thank you, Carly, for warming up that conversation piece, saying, of course, giving is selfish, and isn't that liberating? It's not about us. We could almost end the conversation there, but we won't, because I want to welcome Jenn Klein onto the stage. Jenn, if you would unmute and appear, hopefully we'll find your internet connections cooperating with us. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me and for that warm introduction. And thank you for DonorSearch for having me here as well. I am so thankful and excited to be here. I wrote a book, Giving is Selfish, that I wrote 1 year ago this month. And the title is a little surprising to me, it was at least. But it's something actually that Denzel Washington said that really struck a chord with me. I'm going to just read what he said in his commencement speech. He said, "The most selfish thing you can do in this world is help someone else, because the gratification, the goodness that comes to you, the good feeling of helping others, nothing is better than that. Not the jewelry, not the house, not the cars. That's where the joy is in others. That's where the success is." So when he said that, I was confused. I had to replay it. I thought he was saying giving is selfless, because I had always learned through my many years of volunteering as a youth and even in the nonprofit sector that there was a little bit of pain involved with giving. But over time, and as I learned and developed, I realized he's right. Giving is selfish. So when I became a health coach about 4 years ago, I learned about something called the helper's high. So comment in the chat if you heard about something called the helper's high. Jay, have you heard about the helper's high?
Only through you, but I have a feeling I know what you're talking about. How do you define that, Jenn?
Yeah, so there's 5 basic ways that science has proven that giving back feels good. So it actually has proven to help you live longer. It actually helps you improve better social connections. It's actually proven to lower your blood pressure, stronger mental health outcomes, and you get a surge of the endorphins from being generous. So those are mostly through volunteerism. And that's really what has been the heart of my work with my podcast and business, You Are a Philanthropist. And I really want to encourage us all to be stronger volunteers in our communities, for our families even. I believe that caregiving is an important way to put good back into the world through raising the next generation of future change leaders. I interview what I call philanthropists next door. And the philanthropist next door is all of us who are just trying to do good in the world, either through being kind to others, in sharing of our time, talent, and treasure. And I have interviewed 50 philanthropists next door now on my podcast. And I learned something new from each of them. One of my favorite things was from my guest, Melissa Prendergast. Melissa said, philanthropy is powerful because you can wake up, get on a bed, and decide to do something. You don't have to go to school for it. You don't even need to have a job or a lot of money. You can wake up one day and say, I can change the world. When I was a young mother, I had my son was 5 months old, and I went back to my job, and I was very tired. I had sleepless nights, and I kind of was burnt out from these sleepless nights and this maybe a career path that I had felt maybe wasn't fulfilling me anymore as it used to. And I decided that I was going to define myself as a philanthropist. And that really kind of is what was also the impetus for me starting my own business and moving out of the full-time desk job that I had as a nonprofit employee. And so I wanted to share with you what I wrote on LinkedIn to declare that I was a philanthropist, because I decided that I was going to redefine philanthropy. So I wrote, and I hope you all can relate to this, and please comment in the chat if sometimes you feel burnt out at your nonprofit job and sometimes feel like you're not recognized the way that you would like to be for the good work you're doing. You're really doing truly good work. And I'm so thankful that we're partnering together to make this world a better place together. So this is what I wrote. After 10 years in the fundraising field, I have decided I am able to call myself a philanthropist. While I haven't given significant sums of my stash of cash worthy of a slight nod from Merriam-Webster, I have given the most important commodity on earth, my time. I've given my time, passion, and energy day after day, nights and weekends for the last 10 years. I think all of us, fundraisers, aggressive givers, volunteers, nonprofit workers, should be open to redefining ourselves as philanthropists. It can't just be for a select few. It can't be for an exclusive club. It's more than that. It's my day-to-day, 9 to 5, hardworking nonprofit job. I hope my connection's okay.
There's a little bit of lagging, but you are coming through.
Okay, sorry about that, everyone. So after I wrote that post and decided that I was going to call myself a philanthropist, I felt like I was putting myself on an equal playing field as these, powerful and successful people that I was partnering with in the fundraising world to make the world a better place. And it was an aha moment, as Oprah would say, to redefine myself this way. And I'd be curious if people would put in the chat if they've ever thought about calling themselves a philanthropist. And so some of the basic things I do when I interview my philanthropists on my podcast is I ask them 4 basic questions. I share what it is that you do, who inspires you to give, what do you enjoy about giving, and what advice is it that you have for people who don't know where to get started. And the reason why I ask these questions is to really have a story of what these folks are doing in their everyday lives to help their communities. And oftentimes they're sharing about why they started giving. And typically I've noticed there's a pattern of someone explaining that there was a role model in their life. It was usually someone, either a parent or a family friend. And that's why when I wrote my book about caregiving, I really wanted to remind ourselves that philanthropy does start at home as well. And I asked them what they enjoy about giving, and they always delightfully tell me, because like we've talked about, giving is selfish and it feels good, and that is a really good thing. I like to say it boomerangs back to us. Some call it karma, but I like to believe we're hardwired to give, and I think that is really great that we feel good when we give. One of the things I think it's important to shed some light on, and I think that we have some work to do to discuss today, is the sad fact that just 25% of Americans volunteer every year. And I find that very low. And I want to see more people volunteer because, like I'm talking about, it feels good to give. So it helps the giver and the receiver, and we're all kind of partners in making this world a better place. So the introduction to my podcast is this: you are the kind of person that wants to improve the lives of others, but you need to take pride in your everyday action. I believe every act of goodwill deserves to be recognized as philanthropy. Each individual act you take impacts another's life. Believe that what you do makes a difference. So call yourself a philanthropist and start a ripple effect of generosity that boomerangs back to you. So the interesting thing about the 75% of Americans who don't volunteer is that there was a study that said that 90% of them want to volunteer, but they don't because they don't feel like they have the time. And I think that's where we as fundraisers and nonprofit employees can be really mindful of making sure that there are smaller nonprofit volunteer opportunities available to those folks who want to be involved but don't feel like they have a lot of time. And I'm just going to quote another one of my guests. His name was Howie Hutchison. He is an exceptional nonprofit director, and he said, "I have a value to provide a donor. I can help them grow. How can I be a better person in our society? How can I help them grow in that way?" He calls it activating generosity. And he doesn't credit himself for saying that, but I had never heard that before either. So I love that if you go on LinkedIn and you can do the hashtag activate generosity, and his information will sign up about ways that he has helped others get excited about volunteering, which is really what I want to partner with you today about. So just if there's any questions coming through, Jay, please let me know.
I will. No, not so far. Please go ahead and keep sharing.
Okay. So one of the things I think about when I want to help others is gratitude. And gratitude has been a really important component to me to start my day and to kind of ground myself. And this is actually an idea of Oprah. I heard it first from her about starting your day off or your evening at the end of the day, writing down, 5 things you're thankful for. And I think that gratitude allows us to kind of shift from the negative mindset to a more positive mindset. And that there is a relationship between gratitude and giving. The definition of the word gratitude is not just showing appreciation, but also a readiness to return kindness. That means there's a link between gratitude and giving, but the dictionary is sure to tell that it is not. It is different from indebtedness. Indebtedness feels obligatory. There's something special about the cultivation of gratitude that makes us eager or ready to return kindness. So I find gratitude is magic. When I started doing some research for my book, I also found some great quotes from famous people throughout history, throughout all over the world, saying such wonderful things about giving back. And so I'm just going to quote a few of my favorites. Aristotle said, "The essence of life is to serve and to do good." Gandhi said, "Be the change you wish to see in the world." John D. Rockefeller said, "Think of giving not only as a duty, but as a privilege." Mother Teresa said, "If you can't feed 100 people, then feed just one." Anne Frank said, "No one has ever become poor by giving." Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others?" So in summary, I believe all of us can remind ourselves and others about the power of volunteerism, not in just that it makes a difference for our world, but also it helps ourselves. And I like to say boomerangs back. I believe we can fill our own cup in equal measure to helping others as a crucial component to practicing self-care and using gratitude.
Thanks so much, Jenn. I know that people who are here with us live will probably have thoughts on this in their own experience too. And I appreciate all that you just shared, as well as the other comments that you've quoted from. I do have questions, and I'm sure other people do too. But I am curious about the answer to your question. First of all, whether or not people consider themselves philanthropists. This is really important definitionally, and it doesn't mean you have to feel that way, but I'd like to know if you do. So please let us know in the chat if that's something you've considered or adopted, if that's the way you think about what you do. That would be very helpful, actually, to our conversation. And while people are doing that in the chat, Jenn, I wanted to ask you, you talked about, of course, your podcast and the Philanthropists Next Door. So as you were starting to do those, I have a couple questions. First of all, how are you defining philanthropy at that stage? And then how are you selecting the people, or finding the people and acquiring the people who are willing to tell their own personal stories when they aren't the Rockefellers and Gateses and Oprahs of the world?
Yeah. So like I said, that day I was in my office and my oldest son was 5 months old, was a tough day for me. I had just come back from maternity leave, and I was very tired. And so when I had that aha moment that I was a philanthropist, it helped me see that I could validate myself in the work that I was doing. Mm-hmm. And over time, when I decided to stay home with my kids, I learned about, and I talk about this in my book, about how never in my life had I then started to give so much of myself to someone else through raising my young child, that I got lost in taking care of myself. So all of this was kind of a development of what was happening in that time of my life, where I was learning how to be a parent, how to give, and also how to practice self-care. And I ended up getting asked to be on a radio show because someone liked what I had been posting on LinkedIn. They thought it was really neat that I was saying that everyone can be a philanthropist and philanthropy is fun, fundraising is fun. And so from there, people recommended I start a podcast. And that is when I decided to find folks who either I knew through my own network or I knew through my network's network, found on LinkedIn, that would share their inspiring stories of helping others. So I have some folks on my podcast have gone on to actually win awards in philanthropy. Before I interviewed them, they were just being very generous with their time, and either through their business, for example, this individual I'm thinking about, Eric Goodman, and for example, is very generous with his business support. And I think that's another component to philanthropy that I talk about in my book, which is that we can support businesses that are generous as well.
So, Jenn, you've talked to a whole bunch of people in the course of doing that work. What is you're just putting everything aside, when you just think back across all those conversations, what was the one that surprised you the most, that really moved you the most?
There was actually a gentleman in my network who, his name is Ron, and Ron is not someone I would define societally as a philanthropist. But once I started talking to him and started realizing the value of what he was doing in his community, I decided to have him on my show. Ron is actually housing insecure, and at the time was selling the Streetwise newspaper in Washington, D.C. And he had written poems, and he was selling a newspaper to support the homeless community, including himself. And so I welcomed him on my show and said, tell me more about how you give back to your community. And he said, I say good morning and I smile to people. And it touched me because sometimes we don't think about our what I call everyday pleasantries, just opening the door for the person behind us or a smile on our face. Like, these acts of kindness do have a ripple effect and do help others.
Yeah, absolutely. We had a couple comments that I just want to make sure I share, and thank you for these in the chat. One of which from Carly, just saying, honestly, I consider myself to be an activist. And there's something about the term philanthropist that might be considered bourgeois that she can't, in her case, can't reconcile with her working class existence, which I think is probably a common sentiment among people working in the nonprofit sector, where we are not always, we don't join it for the money. Let's put it that way. So it's a very kind of interesting comment. Did you, as you've talked to people, have you seen people strain with not the idea about generosity and how to give and the value it brings to us personally and collectively, but also just with the terminology we use, especially the word philanthropy? Have you run into people say, I just can't accept that term?
Yes, I did. There's a man that I interviewed named Noah Chesnan who works, he's been very involved with the New England Aquarium. And he said to me behind the scenes privately, Jenn, I do not feel like I am a philanthropist. And I said, you do not need to believe you are in order to be a guest on my show. I have decided that your philanthropic work, you know, even though you're not, you know, donating millions of dollars, you're giving your time, and your time is so valuable. And it's like, you know, it's the most important commodity we have. And so, so I was really grateful that I was able to recognize him for his philanthropic work. And I think for him, it didn't, I don't think he wanted to be convinced that he was. I don't think he needed that, like maybe I did, you know. But for me, it felt really good to acknowledge the good work that he's doing for the aquarium.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's a value in that. Not everybody needs their name on the wall, but I'm sure that some level of appropriate personalized recognition really has value in showing people that we care and we value what they do, but also as an example to others. We have had other comments here, which I just want to call attention to because they're so poignant. One is Marianne was talking about how when you help others, it helps you to forget the circumstances that are hard in your life that you're experiencing. And Sagda, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Sagda, who said that they would identify as a philanthropist and believing that philanthropy is a mindset and a way of life, especially after your comments today, Jenn. There's also Lauren who had said, I never thought of myself as a philanthropist until I met Jenn. And as a frontline fundraiser, this is an important note for people in our sector, I can now see myself as a partner to both the donors and the beneficiaries of philanthropy and can serve as a bridge to help develop relationships that are mutually beneficial. That's something that'd be great to dive into for a second. So you live on both sides of this. And there really shouldn't be sides at all, but there seem to be, between the people who ask for support, often for institutions, and those who provide it. But I know that in my own work, we've had the conversation for a long time about how meaningful it can be to actually be contributing time, as you've pointed out, also money, because then we're in a different position to be advocating for our cause or causes because we are personally invested in them. When you've, both for yourself and the people you've interviewed, how important do you think it is that, especially in the fundraising side of things, that we're also donors, that we both see ourselves as donors, but we're actually doing the work as donors?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I think we need to give ourselves first in order to, like you said, ask people to join you. And I feel like, and for me, when I started off in the fundraising world, I was straight out of college, and my first salary was $27,000, and that was very difficult for a nonprofit employee 20 years ago who had just graduated from college. And I sat around at meetings at 7 in the morning with some very influential plastic surgeons, billionaires, hedge fund professionals, and I was a little insecure about what I was doing in that world. But over time, I've come to learn that we are all partners, and they enjoyed working with me. I enjoyed working with them, and that together we were spending our time every week discussing how we were going to start a capital campaign.
Right. And I guess since you were contributing as well, albeit on $27,000 a year, it probably gave you a sense of agency and I don't know, gravitas, because you're sitting right there with them, but you're already invested. You're asking them to join you.
Right. Yeah. Sure.
I had other questions about some of what you were sharing. You talked about the 4 questions that you ask people, and that helps bring you into their journey, I guess. And I've toyed with that also, trying to find questions that help people to really tell their story. Is there any particular question that you found to be very, very valuable in helping people to peel back the layers of the onion, and especially that might be valuable to the fundraisers in our meeting today, who are trying to figure out what's the question that really helps people to just open up and be themselves so we can help them to give?
The question, my favorite question on the podcast is, I like to say, what's your vision for a better world? And I like for people to kind of step back and ask them, why am I doing this? What is the change I want to see in the world? And I love hearing those responses. One of my guests, John Fisher, was my favorite response. And he just said, I want to see everyone follow their passion. And, his passion is being involved with the school board in his town, and Rotary, and it's actually my father. So my father is my, the person who role modeled for me what it means to be a philanthropist. And so he's had the most impact on my work as my role model. And to interview him on my podcast was very special as well.
I almost wish we'd invited him here. It would have been fun to hear the conversation between the two of you. That's a great interview. I wanted to ask you also about something else you talked about that was really interesting to me about volunteerism. And I'm familiar with the statistics, but it's fun to dive into it together and really understand what else is happening there. So I think you said that only 25% of the population volunteers. That's lower than the percentage of people who give, but both those numbers have been declining for a long time. We're now at under 49.6% of the population who give to charity financially. And that volunteerism number has also declined. But you said that 90%, I think 90% of those who don't give, the 75%, or rather don't volunteer, I should say, are not doing so because they don't have enough time. And you spoke to that very eloquently. I'm wondering, are there things that we can do within our organizations that we can't give them time, but we might make it easier for them to figure out how to make the time? Maybe open the door a little wider so they don't have to try and figure out, well, how do I volunteer in the first place? What am I going to do? Am I qualified? These kinds of questions. What can we do so we at least remove one barrier to participating with us actively as volunteers?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think that improving the volunteer rate would be really exciting for me. It's part of the reason why I started, You Are a Philanthropist, is because I obviously don't feel like I can contribute millions in order to make bigger change in the world. But I'm focusing on my little corner of the world. What I can do as a nonprofit employee, as someone who runs a business, and that is really getting the word out about how fun it is to give and how beneficial it is to give. And it's beneficial for our families as well. For example, I have a local food pantry. Every other month, I go around to a dozen of my neighbors' homes and with my children in the car, and we pick up groceries on the steps of my neighbors, and we bring it to the food pantry. Only happens 6 times a month. It takes me, and they actually record how many hours I volunteered. I literally volunteer like going around for like 2 hours picking up groceries every other month. And it is so fulfilling and rewarding, and teaching my kids about the importance of volunteering and helping others. And that, if we could offer more, especially for young parents who are very busy, if we could offer more opportunities with small pockets of time, I think we'll be able to help more people get involved.
Right. And I know I have seen statistics in the past, plus I've experienced it on the inside of organizations where people who volunteer tend to be more generous financially as well. I mean, they're already there, they're already giving their time. But it's funny because then again, bridging these conversations, if the people who are willing to donate time are often, we know statistically, willing to also donate money, one thing I keep running into is organizations saying, well, we can't ask them because they're already giving their time. And now you've talked to a lot of people where you're making clear that the value of time, the value of money, the value of all the things we do, testimony, et cetera, all have a philanthropic value. How can we help our organizations to see that it's okay if someone's donating time, it's okay to also invite them to give financially if they have the means and the desire to do so?
Yeah, I think that we have to get out of our own heads sometimes. And I think that's why really kind of grounding ourselves in the statistics of how good it feels to give. And sometimes fundraising can feel like you're pulling teeth. I mean, I think that's a phrase we can sometimes throw out there. It's like you feel like you're pulling teeth. But the reality is we're like joining together in the exciting mission of our organization, that we're both passionate about, that we're both invested in on some level. And really, like you said, continuing to draw people closer in together, because we can do more when we have more people involved.
I know that drawing people out is maybe it's even more challenging today than it was a few years ago. You've talked about declining numbers, but I think there's another factor, and it was alluded to by Carly in the chat, which is that some of us may have become more introverted or maybe just more isolated in some respects since the height of the pandemic. That was a kind of an altering experience for many people. And even though we don't talk about it much anymore, it made an imprint on us. So have you seen that much of our work is more challenging, or maybe is it an antidote to some of those things that we experienced collectively during the height of the pandemic?
Yeah, I think that the pandemic was, you know, for example, my place of worship closed for a year and a half. That was very difficult for me. It was my community. I volunteered with them. I, went and gave in the offering plate. I went to service, and I didn't have that anymore. And it took me a few years after that to go find a new community. But yeah, there was definitely a pause on all of those connections that we made. But I think that volunteerism really can help us to combat loneliness, because it does allow us to connect again. And we do have more opportunity now I would not be here today if it were not for Zoom. And being able to connect with you all through these new technologies that I didn't use as often before. So I think that the pandemic brought a lot of difficulties, but there's also been opportunities that have arisen out of it.
Right. And hopefully some of those are ones we can continue to share and remind people about, including right now, by asking if you could tell people how to find out more about your work and to listen to your podcast. Where can people find your podcast? First of all, and we'll make sure Jack includes all that in the chat.
Yes. So if you want to find everything about me, my website is youarephilanthropist.com. And I have all my podcast episodes on there. I have some of my blogs. I have my merchandise. I have a link to my book. I would love to connect with you on LinkedIn. I'm also on Instagram. All of that you can find on my website, youarephilanthropist.com. If you join my newsletter, I have a free download called 10 Ways You Can Be a Philanthropist. And I'd love to continue the conversation with you about how we can support more people in volunteering and giving back and in the industry. And please do let me know if you know of anybody that would want to be interviewed for my season 4 of my podcast coming up later this fall.
Any really big special surprises in terms of those? Have you already started recording them?
I have not started recording. I actually I release by seasons depending on the level of involvement I have in my kids' life. And we had some wonderful memories made this summer as a family, and I'm just getting back into the season 4. So I hope that will come out next month.
And maybe just a last question on the personal front, because you talked about the kind of the origin story of this, and I love origin stories. So having that baby and then making these decisions, how is it for you now? So first of all, how old is your child?
So they're 9 and 6. They're 2 boys, and it's a lot easier to manage life since I'm sleeping through the night now. But I love volunteering with them, and I think that that's really exciting for me is to learn, more about them, what their passions are. My older son wants to be on my show to talk about soccer because he loves soccer. He's not involved with any soccer nonprofits yet, but I certainly think I should find them for him. yeah, I parenting has been my highest calling, my hardest career path. And like I said, it was really, you know, shifted my thinking. And it inspired me writing my book, Giving is Selfish, because I spent many nights being selfless, but then learning about the joys of giving back.
Well, if we have you speaking back, if we have you back, hopefully next time it won't be just you and your father because he inspired you, but maybe your son. It'd be great to hear the three of you talk about this stuff and in your own language and how much of an impact it's had on you. Thank you very much for sharing all this, Jenn. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. And Mary Ann, you can find my book on Amazon.
Yes, of course. There are links already Jack has put in the chat for much of this, but I don't know if the Amazon one is there, but we'll try to get that in there as well as in the show notes. And I do want to remind folks that there is a recording of this, which will be sent to you through a link in a letter you're going to be receiving in the next 48 hours. So be on the lookout for that. If you don't receive it, it means it's gone to spam. And if you're watching this in a recording and you'd like to get links to these other recordings, just send me a note. My name is Jay Frost, of course. This is the Philanthropy Mastermind series. You can find me at j@donorsearch.net, or you can look for me on LinkedIn, as you can find Jenn on LinkedIn, which is where we connected to have this conversation today. So I want to invite you to be in these conversations here and offline in the online world in the weeks ahead. And if you are doing this live with us today, please join us on Thursday when we have another person who's quite devoted to philanthropy, who is going to be joining us for a second time. She was in our podcast, and she'll be discussing her new book, which is right here, The Essential Fundraiser's Handbook. That's Lisa Greer, a major donor. She'll talk all about her origin story as well as the importance of philanthropy in her work and her family. So we'll look forward to seeing you then. And thanks again to Jenn Klein. Thanks to all of you. Thanks to Jack Frost, our producer in the background, making sure everything works as best as the internet allows. We'll look forward to seeing you all next time. Till then, take care. Thanks, Jenn.
Thank you.